The woman pitched forward off the bar stool like a felled tree, a silent, graceless collapse of limbs and expensive fabric. Her fall was cushioned only by the plush custom-woven rug that bore the Sakura Palace insignia, but it couldn't save the silk of her $3,000 Italian designer dress, which was now irrevocably stained, a dark, spreading bloom of premium Junmai Daiganjo sake, the delicate aroma of melon and pear, usually a harbinger of refined pleasure, now smelled of waste and excess. It was 2:30 in the morning, a time when the city's pulse slowed to a drowsy murmur. But inside the opulent shell of the Sakura Palace, the night was clinging on with stubborn, intoxicated fingers. Andre Santos knew, with the bone-deep weariness of a man who lived by the clock, that his shift should have ended a full hour ago. Yet there he was, a silent sentinel in his crisp black uniform, watching one of Manhattan's wealthiest and most recognizable women stagger dangerously close to the polished marble stairs that cascaded down to the lobby. "Ma'am, let me help you." Andre's voice was low and steady, a practiced calm honed over 3 years of navigating the turbulent waters of high-end service. He approached her carefully, his movements measured and non-threatening. He had learned that the combination of wealth, alcohol, and his own dark skin could be a volatile cocktail. Drunk, rich women, in his experience, were a subspecies unto themselves, unpredictable, often imperious, and quick to perceive insult where none was intended. Kindness, he had learned the hard way, was frequently misinterpreted as opportunism, a calculated advance rather than a simple act of human decency. The invisible calculus of race and class was a constant undercurrent in his interactions, a silent language he had been forced to master. "No, I don't need charity," she muttered, her voice a thick slurry of words. She tried to steady herself against an authentic Japanese cherrywood panel, its smooth, dark surface cool against her flushed skin. Her hand left a faint, damp smudge on the polished wood. Her platinum blonde hair, usually coiffed into a severe, architectural style that screamed power and control, was in disarray, a chaotic halo around her head. Her makeup, a masterpiece of subtle enhancement hours earlier, was now a smudged ruin, a testament to the evening's unraveling. But even in this state of glamorous decay, it was impossible not to recognize her. She was Victoria Steinberg, heiress to the Steinberg Hotel empire, a constellation of 5-star properties that dominated the East Coast. Her face was a regular feature in society pages and business journals, a symbol of inherited power and modern influence. Andre hesitated, his training warring with his instinct. The employee handbook was clear: maintain professional distance, alert management to problematic guests, never engage physically unless there was an immediate threat. But his manager, James Morrison, had made himself scarce an hour ago, a phantom, who materialized only to criticize or assert his authority. And Andre, for his part, had begun to notice things, small dissonances in the restaurant's finely tuned symphony. Over the past few months, Victoria Steinberg's appearances had become a catalyst for strange behavior among certain staff members. When she entered, conversations would stop, replaced by a flurry of whispers and nervous sidelong glances. The change was most pronounced in Morrison and the circle of corporate sycophants who sometimes shadowed him on his visits. It was a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a tension that Andre couldn't quite decipher but filed away in the meticulous mental ledger he kept for survival. "Look," he said, his tone gentle but firm, cutting through her protestations. "I'll just call you a taxi, okay? It's late. It's not safe to go out alone like this." Victoria squinted, trying to bring his face into focus. She blinked several times, her brain struggling to process the image of the young, earnest man before her. A flicker of something other than drunken confusion crossed her features. "You're not like the others," she said, her words clearer. Now, as if a brief moment of lucidity had broken through the alcoholic fog, she sagged against him, her weight surprisingly heavy, her arm linking with his for support. "Why are you being nice to me? Everyone else, they just want something." The question caught Andre off guard. It was a raw, vulnerable query that seemed to come from a place deeper than the sake. He wasn't entirely sure how to answer it, because the truth was complex, a tapestry woven from threads of his own history. Maybe it was because he had grown up in a two-bedroom apartment in Queens, watching his mother, Rosa Santos, work 16-hour days as a cleaning lady, her body slowly worn down by the sheer effort of supporting 3 children on her own. He had seen her vulnerability, her exhaustion, her quiet, unyielding dignity in the face of a world that often treated her as invisible. He understood what it meant to be alone and feel the world closing in. Or maybe, a more recent and unsettling thought it was because he had started to suspect that not everything at the Sakura Palace was as pristine and honorable as its reputation suggested. The whispers, the sudden firings of competent Latino cooks, the promotion of less experienced white waiters, it was a pattern, a discordant note in the melody of corporate excellence. They waited on the quiet, rain-slicked sidewalk, the cool night air a welcome antidote to the stuffy, overheated restaurant. The distant wail of a siren was the only sound. As the headlights of the approaching Uber rounded the corner, Victoria muttered something else, her head resting against his shoulder. It was a disjointed phrase about genuine people and second chances. Andre dismissed it as the ramblings of a woman lost in her drink, but he made a mental note of the address she gave the driver, a penthouse on the Upper East Side. A slice of real estate worth more than every paycheck he had ever earned, combined. As he helped her into the back of the black sedan, he felt a strange mix of pity and detachment. She was just another lost soul in a city full of them, albeit one with $1 billion safety net. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't have known, was that a small, discreet security camera, mounted high on the restaurant's ornate facade, was recording every second of their interaction, its unblinking lens capturing a narrative that would soon be twisted into a weapon against him the next day. Andre arrived at work expecting another routine shift, a predictable ballet of taking orders, clearing plates, and maintaining the mask of serene professionalism that the Sakura Palace demanded. He walked through the employee entrance, the air already thick with the smells of simmering dashi and searing wagyu. The day's rhythm was supposed to be immutable, the pre-shift briefing, the meticulous polishing of glasses, the quiet hum of anticipation before the first guests arrived. But the rhythm was broken before it could even begin. Executive Chef Hiroshi Tanaka, a man whose movements were usually as precise and economical as his knife work, intercepted him by the kitchen doors. Hiroshi was a culinary legend, a purist who spoke more through his food than with words. His face, normally a mask of calm concentration, was etched with an unfamiliar tension. "Andre, I need to talk to you. In my office now." The tone was the first alarm bell. It was clipped, formal, and laden with a gravity that Andre had rarely heard directed at him. In the rigid hierarchy of the restaurant, a summons from the executive chef was an event. Andre's heart began a frantic, panicked tattoo against his ribs. He had spent 3 years navigating this world, and he knew that unscheduled calls to private offices rarely ended well for employees on his rung of the ladder. This was doubly true when, upon entering Hiroshi's small, cluttered office, he saw James Morrison leaning against the chef's stainless steel desk. Morrison was a man, sculpted from corporate ambition and barely concealed prejudice. He had a smile that never reached his eyes, a predatory curve of the lips that promised trouble. He was the kind of man who wielded racism not as a blunt instrument, but as a subtle, surgical tool, always careful never to say anything explicitly actionable, but making his intentions crystal clear through the coded language of professional concerns, brand integrity, and establishment standards. Andre had learned to read these codes early in life. It was a survival skill as essential as breathing. "Sit down, Andre," Morrison said, his voice smooth as silk but with a core of steel. He was leafing through a thin folder with deliberately slow theatrical movements, each rustle of paper designed to heighten the tension in the small room. Hiroshi stood awkwardly to the side, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on a point on the floor. He refused to meet Andre's eyes. "I've received some complaints," Morrison began, finally looking up, "about your behavior with our clientele. It seems you've been crossing some lines." Andre's brow furrowed. He did a quick mental scan of his recent shifts, searching for any misstep, any interaction that could have been misconstrued. Nothing came to mind. "What kind of lines, Mr. Morrison?" "Harassing intoxicated clients," Morrison said, pausing dramatically to let the accusation land. He savored each word, a connoisseur of cruelty. "Offering unsolicited services outside of your working hours. Some might say," he added, leaning forward slightly, "that you're trying to take advantage of vulnerable situations, especially with clients of Mrs. Steinberg's caliber." The accusation hit Andre with the force of a physical blow. It knocked the air from his lungs, leaving him dizzy and disoriented. He knew exactly which night Morrison was referring to, but the grotesque distortion of the event left him speechless. It was like watching a film of his own actions played back in a warped, funhouse mirror, his decency twisted into something sordid and predatory. The genuine concern he had felt was being rebranded as a hustle, his kindness as a calculated shakedown. "I just helped a client get home safely," Andre said. his voice remarkably steady despite the rage coiling in his stomach. She was intoxicated and couldn't stand. Anyone would have done the same thing. Morrison's cold smile returned. He opened his briefcase and retrieved a small stack of glossy photographs, fanning them out on the desk like a winning poker hand. They were stills from the security camera. There was Andre, his hand on Victoria's arm. There he was, leaning in to hear her address for the Uber. From a certain cynical perspective, the images could be spun into the narrative Morrison was weaving. Of course, that's what happened, Morrison said, his tone dripping with condescension. The problem, Andre, is one of perception. We simply cannot have employees like you leaving room for this kind of misunderstanding. Our clientele has certain expectations. They value discretion. They require appropriate boundaries. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. The unspoken words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Employees like you, a black man. Andre felt a familiar, weary resignation settle over him. It didn't matter how impeccable his work record was. It didn't matter how many glowing compliments he received from other customers. To a man like Morrison, he would always be a liability, a problem waiting to happen. He was just another black man who had forgotten his place, who had dared to touch the untouchable. So, what are you saying? Andre asked, though the answer was already screaming in his mind. I'm saying, Morrison replied, closing the folder with a soft, final thud, that perhaps this environment isn't the right fit for you anymore. I think you should consider other career opportunities, places more suited to your profile. It was a termination wrapped in the guise of a suggestion, a firing executed with the cowardly precision of a Baccali shipping. But what neither Morrison in his smug triumph, nor Andre in his quiet fury, could possibly have imagined was that at that very moment, across town in a sun-drenched corner office overlooking Central Park, Victoria Steinberg was having a very different kind of conversation. Flanked by two of the city's most formidable corporate lawyers, she was reviewing a dossier of her own. A conversation that would not only rewrite Andre's future, but would expose the rot that had been carefully hidden beneath the polished veneer of the Sakura Palace for years. Because, as it turned out, Victoria Steinberg was much more sober that night than anyone suspected. And what she had discovered about James Morrison and his insidious hiring practices was about to explode in a way that no one at the Sakura Palace would ever forget. The script had been written, the actors were in place, but Morrison had fundamentally misjudged the protagonist. He thought he was dealing with a pawn, when in fact he had just tried to discard the queen. The official notice of termination arrived the following Friday. It was delivered not by Morrison, who lacked the courage for a final confrontation, but by a nervous, fresh-faced intern who could barely look Andre in the eye. The letter was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism. A sterile paragraph about operational cost cuts and strategic restructuring. It was a lie so blatant it was almost comical, but everyone in the staff room knew the truth. Morrison had gotten his way. He had called the herd. Andre carefully folded the uniform he had worn with pride for 3 years. The starchy black fabric felt foreign in his hands, a relic from a life that had ended just days ago. He placed it in his locker, next to a worn copy of a book he'd been reading on his breaks. The silence in the locker room was thick and uncomfortable. His colleagues, the ones he had shared jokes and frustrations with, watched him with a mixture of genuine pity and a cowardly, palpable relief that it was him and not them. In a system built on fear, solidarity was a luxury few could afford. As he was about to leave, Chef Hiroshi intercepted him again, this time in the narrow hallway leading to the exit. He moved discreetly, his eyes darting around to ensure they weren't being watched. He pressed a thick sealed envelope into Andre's hand. Your tips, the Japanese chef whispered, his voice low and urgent. From the last 6 months, Morrison was holding them. I kept them separate. They're rightfully yours. Andre looked at the older man, seeing for the first time not a distant culinary master, but an ally trapped in a gilded cage. There was a silent understanding in Hiroshi's eyes, an apology he couldn't speak aloud. Thank you, chef, Andre said, the words feeling inadequate. Morrison is a fool, Hiroshi added, a flicker of defiance in his gaze. He throws away gold because he doesn't like its color. Walking home through the drizzling gray October rain, Andre felt a strange sense of numbness. The city seemed muted, the vibrant chaos of the streets dissolving into a watercolor blur. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over his mother's contact. Rosa Santos was in the middle of her night shift, scrubbing the floors of a soulless office building on Wall Street, but she always answered when he called. It was their unspoken rule. Mum, he said, the word catching in his throat. I lost my job, he stated it bluntly, without preamble. Rosa had taught her children that bad news didn't get better with sugarcoating. Life was hard, and facing it head-on was the only way to endure. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, just the faint hum of a floor polisher. Why? She finally asked. Did you do something wrong? No, Andre replied, a bitter smile touching his lips. I did something right. Another pause, longer this time. Rosa knew her son. She could read the volumes of unspoken history behind those 5 simple words. Come home, she said, her voice a warm, steady anchor in his storm. Let's talk about this. The 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, where Andre had grown up, was a sanctuary, a world away from the cold marble and calculated elegance of Sakura Palace. It smelled, as it always had, of a unique and comforting blend of Fabuloso detergent, brewing Bustelo coffee, and his mother's unwavering strength. Rosa arrived at 6 in the morning, her face etched with fatigue but her eyes clear and sharp. She was still in her blue cleaning uniform, a testament to a night spent erasing the tracks of the powerful. She found her son at the small kitchen table, surrounded by loose sheets of paper covered in his neat, precise handwriting. What's all this? He asked, her voice soft as she poured dark, strong coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. One from a long-forgotten trip to Niagara Falls, the other a promotional item from a bank. I'm trying to understand something that happened at work, Andre replied, gesturing to the notes he had been compiling for months. A pattern. He slid a page toward her. Remember, you told me about that supervisor at Goldman Sachs, the one who always made excuses to transfer you to the toughest floors, the ones with the executive washrooms that needed extra detailing. Rosa nodded, a bitter memory clouding her features. Thompson, 20 years cleaning offices, never had a problem with a single soul, but with him, it was always something. My work was subpar. I was too slow. The only real difference was that I didn't bow and scrape to him like he wanted. I looked him in the eye. That's it. That's exactly it, Andre said, his voice gaining energy. Morrison did the same thing to me, only in a more sophisticated, corporate way. He proceeded to lay out the entire story, the incident with Victoria, the fabricated accusations, and the disturbing pattern he had begun to notice. He showed her his lists, the names of Black and Latino employees who had been systematically reassigned to the back of the house or fired for minor infractions. Infractions that their white colleagues, like the perpetually late but charming waiter, named Chad, committed daily without a hint of consequence. Rosa listened intently, her hand resting on his. Her hands were rough, the skin calloused from years of manual labor, but her touch was gentle. When he finished, she took a long sip of her coffee. Son, she said, her gaze unwavering, sometimes life puts us in a position where we have to choose. We can choose to accept injustice, to swallow it down until it poisons us from the inside, or we can choose to fight back. You know which choice I've always made. Andre smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in days. Rosa Santos was a warrior. She had raised 3 children on her own after her husband, a construction worker, died in a preventable accident on a non-union site. She had faced down racist supervisors, condescending rich ladies, and a system designed to remind her of her place at every turn. And never, not once, had she bowed her head. She had taught him that dignity wasn't something granted by others. It was something you carried within yourself, a fire that no amount of disrespect could extinguish. What are you going to do? She asked her question not one of doubt, but of strategy. I don't know yet, Andre admitted, but I'm not going to let him get away with it. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. On Monday, Andre put on a simple, clean shirt and a pair of dark trousers and returned to the Sakura Palace. This time, he entered through the front door, as a customer. The hostess, a young woman he had trained, looked surprised to see him. He asked for a small table in the corner of the bar, a vantage point from which he could observe the room. From this new perspective, the dynamics he had only sensed before were now starkly, painfully clear. Morrison circled the main dining room like a king, inspecting his domain. His attention a currency he dispensed lavishly on his preferred subjects. He would stop for long, whispered conversations with tables of important-looking white customers. His laughter a little too loud, his posture obsequiously charming. He completely, pointedly ignored the few tables occupied by people of color, his gaze sliding over them as if they were part of the furniture. Then, Andre saw something that made him sit up straighter. Victoria Steinberg entered, alone. She was dressed down, but her aura of wealth was unmistakable. She asked the hostess for a discreet table at the bar. Morrison, spotting her, practically sprinted across the room to greet her, his face wreathed in that familiar, false smile. He bowed slightly, oozing a sycophantic charm that turned Andre's stomach. But Victoria's response was fascinating. She was cool, almost dismissive, cutting his fawning short with a crisp request for a menu. She settled into her seat, not far from Andre, and, like him, she watched. She wasn't just having a drink. She was observing, taking mental notes, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She was paying attention to the details that most patrons, wrapped up in their own worlds, would ignore. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a nod of recognition in the social sense. It was a nod of acknowledgement, of shared purpose. It was a signal, a silent confirmation that they were on the same side of a battle he was just beginning to understand. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind racing, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. The text was brief and to the point. Coffee tomorrow, 9 a.m., Corner Deli on 72nd and Columbus. We have a lot to talk about. Andre stared at the screen, his heart pounding. 3 years of working in that world had taught him one thing above all else: people like Victoria Steinberg didn't send cryptic messages to fired waiters like him without a very specific and very powerful reason. And considering Morrison had used her name as the weapon to end his career, Andre had a strong suspicion that this reason was going to be very, very interesting. In his desk drawer, he kept a small, black moleskin notebook. For the last year, he had been jotting down the inconsistencies he'd witnessed at Sakura Palace. Dates, times, snippets of strange conversations, lists of customers who received inexplicable special treatment. He had never known exactly why he was keeping this record, but an instinct, a quiet voice of self-preservation, told him that this information would one day be important. Now, looking at the pages filled with his own careful handwriting, Andre began to understand. Perhaps it was no coincidence that Morrison was in such a hurry to get rid of him. People who pay attention to details are a threat, an inconvenience when there are secrets to be hidden. Every veiled insult, every act of condescension, every small humiliation Morrison had inflicted upon him had not broken his spirit as intended. Instead, it had forged something new within him, a silent, cold determination that grew stronger under pressure, like a diamond being formed deep within the earth. Morrison, in his arrogance, saw only a waiter he could easily dispose of. He couldn't see the righteous anger, the sharp mind, the deep well of resilience that lay beneath the surface. What the privileged, powerful man didn't know was that with every act of contempt, he was writing his own sentence. And Andre Santos was not the kind of person who forgot. He was the kind of person who kept receipts. The Corner Deli on 72nd and Columbus was the antithesis of the Sakura Palace. It was a quintessential New York City establishment, a place where time seemed to have paused around 1985. The tables were worn formica, the coffee was served in thick, utilitarian ceramic mugs, and the air was permanently saturated with the comforting, greasy aroma of fried bacon and sizzling onions. It was a place for real people, not for the polished avatars of wealth who populated Victoria Steinberg's world. Millionaires, Andre thought, rarely found their way to places with this much character and this little pretense. He arrived at minutes early, a habit ingrained from years in the service industry, and chose a booth in the back, a strategic position with a clear view of the entrance. He still felt a lingering sense of disbelief, a nagging suspicion that this was some kind of elaborate prank or a bizarre dream. She arrived promptly at 9 a.m., pushing through the glass door with a gust of crisp autumn air. Dressed in well-worn jeans, a simple grey cashmere sweater, and a pair of unassuming sneakers, she looked surprisingly ordinary. The ensemble probably cost more than Andre's monthly salary at his old job, but without the armor of couture fashion and elaborate hairstyling, she was almost unrecognizable as the imperious heiress from the society pages. The illusion of normalcy shattered the moment she spoke. "You were fired because of me," she stated, sliding into the booth across from him. There was no preamble, no small talk. Her directness was a force of nature. Morrison fabricated a story. He told his superiors that I filed a formal harassment complaint against you. Andre simply nodded, taking a slow sip of his watery coffee. That's what he implied. Yes, it's a complete lie. Victoria pulled a sleek, impossibly thin smartphone from her jacket pocket and slid it across the table. On the screen was an email chain. Andre leaned in to read it. The recipient was James Morrison. The sender was Victoria Steinberg. It was dated the morning after the incident. "Mr. Morrison," it read, "I'm writing to express my gratitude for the exceptional assistance one of your staff provided last night. He was professional and kind in a difficult situation. Please extend my thanks and commend the employee responsible. Andre read the message twice, his eyes scanning the date, the timestamp, the formal corporate sign-off. Everything matched. Morrison hadn't just exaggerated, he had invented the complaint. Out of whole cloth, a malicious fiction designed for a single purpose. Why are you showing me this? He asked, his voice low. Victoria retrieved her phone, her expression hardening. A small, humorless smile played on her lips. 2 reasons. First, because my family's private equity firm has a 40% stake in the hospitality group that is financing the entire North American expansion of the Sakura Palace brand. We are, for all intents and purposes, Morrison's boss. She let that sink in for a moment. And second, because for the past 6 months, I have been personally investigating a very interesting and deeply disturbing pattern of racial discrimination in the hiring, promotion, and firing of employees across all of their managed properties. A jolt went through Andre, a sudden, clarifying shock, as if a disconnected series of circuits in his brain had just been wired together. You knew, he said, a statement, not a question. You knew I was going to be fired. I suspected it was a strong possibility. She corrected him gently. Morrison has a well-documented, albeit cleverly concealed, history. I've been tracking his metrics. 3 black front-of-house employees fired in the last year, or for minor infractions that their white colleagues commit without consequence. A brilliant Latino sommelier suddenly transferred to a back-of-house inventory role right after receiving a glowing write-up in a major food blog. You, with your impeccable record and growing rapport with high-value clients, were next on his list. You were becoming too visible, too competent. She reached into a large leather tote bag and pulled out a thick binder, placing it on the table. With a soft thud, she opened it, and Andre saw pages of spreadsheets, color-coded charts, and copies of official documents. There were employment contracts, performance reviews, internal complaint records, exit interviews. Andre recognized some of the names, faces of colleagues who had simply vanished from the restaurant, their departures explained away with vague corporate excuses. Morrison is a sculptor of prejudice, Victoria continued, her voice cold and analytical. He's systematically building a team of exclusively white, brand-appropriate front-of-house employees. He keeps a few Latinos in the kitchen, just enough to avoid raising obvious red flags on a demographic report. But anyone black in a customer-facing position is gradually, methodically weeded out. Andre stared at the papers, at the cold, hard data that confirmed the gut feeling of injustice he had lived with for years. It wasn't just in his head, it was real. It was a strategy. How did you get all this? As I said, I'm an investor. I have a right to review human resources reports and operational data, Victoria explained. She paused, her gaze meeting his. And I have other, more personal reasons for wanting to see a man like James Morrison face the consequences of his actions. Over the next hour, fueled by endless refills of deli coffee, Victoria filled in the gaps. She told him her own story. It wasn't just about corporate justice. It was personal. A close friend of hers, a talented black woman who had been a rising star in the hotel management world, had her career derailed by a man just like Morrison, her confidence shattered by 1,000 subtle cuts of prejudice. Victoria had watched it happen, feeling powerless at the time. Now, with the influence and resources she commanded, she had made a quiet vow to dismantle these old boy networks wherever she found them. She spoke of how Morrison had consistently rejected her suggestions for diversity and inclusion programs at the restaurant, dismissing them with condescending talk about maintaining appropriate clientele and protecting establishment standards. The same coded language he had used on Andre. She had realized he wasn't just filtering employees. He was filtering customers, creating an environment that subtly discouraged anyone who didn't fit his narrow lily-white vision of excellence. That night you helped me, she confessed, leaning forward. I wasn't nearly as drunk as I appeared. I was acting. It was a test. A secret shopper scenario of my own design. I wanted to see how the staff would react to a vulnerable, high-value customer when management wasn't watching. Morrison saw me come in, saw the state I was pretending to be in, and he immediately disappeared into his office. He wanted plausible deniability. You, she said, her eyes locking with his, were the only one who didn't walk away. The only one who offered to help without a hint of judgment or calculation. Andre leaned back in the worn vinyl booth, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with dizzying speed. So it was all staged. The situation was staged, she clarified. Your response was not. You showed genuine decency and concern for a stranger you believed was in distress. And that, Andre, told me everything I needed to know about your character. She opened a sleek silver laptop, turned it to face him, and showed him a detailed presentation. There were hiring charts broken down by ethnicity, retention statistics, promotion patterns, graphs that showed a clear and undeniable correlation between race and career trajectory at Sakura Palace. The case against Morrison wasn't just anecdotal. It was built with the cold, irrefutable precision of mathematics. I am putting together a class action lawsuit for systematic racial discrimination, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But a lawsuit is only as strong as its human stories. I need employees, current and former, who are willing to testify, to give a voice to these numbers. Andre looked from the damning data on the screen to the determined face of the woman across from him. And do you think I'm going to get other employees to take that risk? Most of them have families, rent to pay. They're terrified of being blacklisted. That's why I need you, she said simply. Not just as a witness, but as a coordinator. You know the people, you know the culture, you know who you can trust. She closed her laptop, the click echoing in the quiet deli. And there's something else. This isn't just about tearing something down, it's about building something better. When this is over, I'm offering you the opportunity to take over the management of a brand new Japanese restaurant my company is opening in Harlem. Not just manage it. I'm offering you shared ownership, a profit-sharing model for every single employee, and a board of directors with a mandate to enforce the clearest, most stringent diversity and inclusion policies in the industry. Andre was silent for a long moment, the proposal hanging in the air, seeming too good, too perfect, to be true. It was a fantasy, a daydream for every overlooked and undervalued service worker. But he was no fool. He had learned to be wary of gifts. What's the real reason? He finally asked, his voice skeptical. What's your angle? Victoria smiled, and for the first time, it was a smile of genuine admiration. My angle is simple. James Morrison underestimated me because I'm a woman and I'm young. He sees me as a silly heiress playing at business. He underestimated you because you're a black man who he saw as just a waiter. People like him, men drunk on their own perceived superiority, they repeat the same mistakes of pride over and over again. My angle, Andre, is that I enjoy proving them wrong. He thought of his mother, her tired hands and her warrior spirit. He thought of the stack of bills on their kitchen table. He thought of the years he had spent swallowing small and large humiliations at the Sakura Palace, the quiet rage simmering just beneath the surface. He thought of his colleagues who had been quietly disappeared, their talent discarded like trash. If I do this, Andre said slowly, the decision solidifying in his mind, it won't just be about getting a better job. It won't even just be about the money. It will be about making sure that James Morrison, and men like him, face the full, public, and undeniable consequences of what they've done. Victoria held out her hand across the table. That, she said, her grip firm and sure, is exactly why I chose you. That afternoon, Andre began to work the phones. He started with 3 former colleagues from Sakura Palace, men and women he knew had been wronged. The first 2, a server named Maria and a bartender named David, agreed to meet him, their voices, a mixture of fear and hope. The third, a young kitchen assistant named Marcus who was still working there, was his crucial inside source. Marcus, quiet and observant, was willing to discreetly document the discriminatory practices that were still happening every single day. Over the next 2 weeks, Andre underwent a profound transformation. The quiet, deferential waiter was replaced by a meticulous and fearless strategist. He moved with a newfound purpose, a fire in his belly. He met his former colleagues in quiet coffee shops and parks, carefully explaining the plan, reassuring them, and collecting their stories. He recorded authorized phone conversations, his voice calm and steady as he coaxed out details and timeline. He received furtively snapped photos from Marcus' work schedules that showed preferential treatment, internal memos with coded language, candid shots of Morrison fawning over white patrons while ignoring others. Each new piece of evidence was a brick in the wall of their case, revealing the systematic, architectural nature of the discrimination. Morrison wasn't just a casual bigot. He was a deliberate designer of exclusion, using his power to mold the Sakura Palace in his own warped image of racial and social superiority. Meanwhile, at the restaurant, Morrison went about his normal routine, preening and posturing, completely oblivious to the storm gathering just over the horizon. His arrogance was his Achilles heel. It made him feel untouchable, and that feeling had made him careless. He smiled with self-satisfaction as he approved the transfer of yet another Latino waiter to a less visible, lower tipping section, believing he was perfecting his little kingdom of privilege. But justice, as Andre was learning, grows best in the shadows. It is fed by the quiet patience of the wronged and the meticulous collection of truth. The sweetest, most devastating revenge is the one the enemy never sees coming, the one that is served not hot with anger, but cold with facts. The meeting was scheduled for Monday at 10 a.m. sharp, in the main corporate boardroom on the 48th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown. The room was a temple of corporate power, with a long polished mahogany table, sweeping views of the city, and an air of intimidating silence. James Morrison arrived 5 minutes early, brimming with confidence. He believed it was a routine quarterly review, a discussion about operational efficiency and profit margins with the investor group. He had prepared a presentation highlighting his cost-cutting measures, a euphemism for the recent firings, and was expecting a pat on the back. What he didn't know was that in a smaller conference room 1 floor above, Andre Santos was sitting, with a technician, watching a live video feed of the boardroom, a silent observer at his own tribunal. Victoria entered the room precisely at 10, flanked by 2 stone-faced lawyers who radiated an aura of expensive, lethal competence. With them was a stern-looking woman introduced as the head of the corporate ethics board. Morrison greeted them all with his customary fake smile, adjusting the knot of his expensive silk tie as if he were preparing to receive an award. "Mr. Morrison," Victoria began, her voice cool and devoid of emotion as she opened a thick binder identical to the one she'd had at the deli. "I need to discuss with you some irregularities in the hiring and firing standards that have come to our attention." Morrison chuckled, a dismissive, arrogant sound. "Of course, Victoria, we're always open to optimization. I hope you've noticed how effectively I've managed to maintain the restaurant's standards of excellence by, shall we say, eliminating problematic elements." He had just handed them the knife. The first lawyer, a man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes, stood up and turned on a large projector screen at the end of the room. A detailed chart appeared, its title stark and damning: Employee Terminations and Reassignments by Ethnicity. Past 18 months, the numbers were brutal in their clarity. 100% of black front-of-house employees had been laid off or fired. 80% of Latino front-of-house employees had been reassigned to non-visible lower-paying positions. 0% of white front-of-house employees had been fired for infractions, despite documented warnings for offenses identical to those that had cost their minority colleagues their jobs. Morrison's smile faltered, twitching at the corners. "Well, those numbers," he stammered, "they can be misleading. Statistical coincidences happen, coincidences." Victoria's voice was sharp as ice. She pressed a button on a remote control. The next slide appeared, showing verbatim transcripts of recorded conversations. There was Morrison, talking to another manager about the need to cultivate a more appropriate clientele. There was Morrison, instructing a supervisor to find a reason to write up a specific black hostess. There was Morrison, bragging to a corporate peer on the phone about how he had successfully cleaned house. The color drained from Morrison's face, leaving it a pasty, sickly gray. How did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "These recordings are illegal." "Actually," the second lawyer replied, her voice calm and matter-of-fact, "they are not. New York is a one-party consent state. All of these recordings were made with the full knowledge and consent of at least one of the parties involved. They are completely and devastatingly legal." Victoria continued her relentless assault, clicking through the slides. There were internal emails he thought he had deleted. There were Marcus's photos of HR documents left carelessly on a desk. There were signed, notarized statements from Maria, David, and a half-dozen other former employees, each one a testament to his reign of prejudice. And then came the final, crushing bombshell. It was a video, grainy, shot on a hidden camera, but unmistakably clear. It was Morrison, in his own office, the night of Andre's dismissal. He was alone, pouring himself a glass of champagne. He raised the glass in a solitary toast, a smug, triumphant grin on his face, and said to the empty room, "One more problem solved." Who recorded this?" Morrison stammered, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. "Someone you completely underestimated," Victoria replied, her voice ringing with cold fury. "Someone who worked at your restaurant for 3 years, watching you, taking notes, and documenting every single one of your discriminatory decisions." On cue, the boardroom door opened, Andre Santos entered. He was dressed in a simple, dark suit, and he carried a cardboard box overflowing with files. He walked calmly to the table and set the box down with a definitive thud. Morrison stared at him, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief, as if he were seeing a ghost. "You," he whispered, the word barely audible. "Impossible. You're just a waiter. A black waiter you thought would be easy to get rid of," Andre interrupted, his voice steady and powerful, amplified by the room's acoustics. He looked directly at the man who had tried to ruin him. "You're right. I was just that, until you and men like you taught me that people like me need to be smarter, more patient, and more prepared than you could ever imagine, just to survive." Andre opened the box, revealing the fruits of his and Victoria's investigation, months of meticulous documentation, every conversation recorded, every email copied, every witness statement collated. "You've built such a clear, undeniable pattern of discrimination," Andre said, his voice resonating with the weight of justice, that even a blind jury could see it. Morrison shot to his feet, his face now a blotchy, furious red, sweat beading. On his forehead, he tried to regain some semblance of control, of his old authority. "This is a setup, a conspiracy. You can't prove anything. I know important people. I have connections." Victoria smiled, a cold, final smile. "You had connections," she corrected him, past tense, because she glanced at her watch. In approximately 15 minutes, a press release containing a summary of these findings will be sent to every major news outlet in the city. In 30 minutes, every current employee of the Sakura Palace will receive an email with copies of all of this documentation. And in 1 hour, the corporate board of directors will hold an emergency vote, via teleconference, to terminate your employment for cause. Morrison staggered, leaning heavily on the desk as if his legs could no longer support him. "You can't do this to me," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "I built this place. I maintained the standards." "The standards you maintained," Andre said, his voice calm but unyielding, "were standards of hatred, of exclusion, of the abuse of power. You didn't build anything. You only tried to destroy people who, in every way that truly matters, were better than you." Victoria stood a signal that the meeting was over. "Mr. Morrison, you are fired, effective immediately, for systematic discrimination, creation of a hostile work environment, and gross violation of corporate diversity and inclusion policies. Your benefits are terminated. Your stock options are void. Any professional references will be accompanied by a full and detailed report on your practices, and we will be supporting the class action lawsuit that will be filed against you, personally, this afternoon." As to discreet but firm security guards entered the room to escort him out. Morrison looked at Andre one last time, his eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "You've ruined my life. 20 years of my career. Gone." "No," Andre replied, looking directly into the eyes of the man who had tried to humiliate and discard him. "You ruined your own life. You did it the moment you decided that the color of your skin gave you the right to judge and destroy the dignity of other people." I just held up a mirror. As Morrison was led from the building, a broken man stripped of his power and prestige. Andre remained in the boardroom, watching his former tormentor disappear into an elevator. Victoria came and stood beside him, looking out at the panoramic view. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Andre took a deep, shuddering breath. The first, truly free breath he'd taken in years. "I don't feel vindicated," he said, surprising himself. "I feel light. Like I can finally breathe without having to worry about being judged for the space I occupy." The best revenge, he was beginning to realize, wasn't about the fall of your enemy, it was about your own rise. 6 months later, Andre stood in the middle of a vast, light-filled space in Harlem. The air smelled of sawdust, fresh paint, and possibility. What was once an abandoned warehouse was being transformed by a team of architects and designers into something James Morrison could never have conceived of in his wildest, most exclusionary dreams. The sign, not yet mounted but leaning against a brick wall, read Kibō. It was the Japanese word for hope. Kibō would not be just another Japanese restaurant. It would be a statement, a revolution in an industry notorious for its brutal hierarchies and toxic work environments. Victoria had been better than her word. Andre wasn't just the general manager. His name was on the ownership documents as a 30% co-owner with complete autonomy to build his own team and his own culture. And, most radically, every single employee, from the head chef to the dishwashers, would be part of a profit-sharing plan. They wouldn't just be working for a paycheck, they would be building something for themselves. So how many of the old Sakura Palace crew did you manage to hire? Victoria asked, walking through the bustling construction site, a blueprint in her hand. Everyone who wanted to come, Andre replied, a broad, genuine smile spreading across his face. He gestured around the room. And a few that Morrison fired years ago who I tracked down. That's Jenny over there, our new head sommelier. Marcus is taking over as executive chef. And I even convinced Chef Hiroshi to come on as our official cultural consultant and quality advisor. He said he wanted to cook food with soul again. The irony was sublime. Morrison had spent years meticulously eliminating problematic elements, convinced he was curating excellence. Now, those very same talented, dedicated, problematic people were creating something that would soon make the Sakura Palace seem old-fashioned, stuffy, and irrelevant. Andre's phone rang. It was his mother. "Son," she said, her voice filled with a joyful disbelief. "I just saw an article about you online. It has your picture. Are you sure this isn't all a dream?" Andre laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated happiness. The article had been published that morning in a major New York magazine, From Fired Waiter to Fearless Owner, How Andre Santos is Serving Up Justice and Hope in Harlem. The photo accompanying it showed Andre standing with his new, diverse staff. They were all smiling, a natural, easy camaraderie radiating from the image, the polar opposite of the tense, fearful atmosphere Morrison had cultivated. "It's real, Mum," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And there's more. Remember all those conversations we had, about dignity in the workplace, about being respected? I'm in a position to create those jobs now, for dozens of people." Meanwhile, across town, James Morrison was facing a very different reality. The lawsuit, buoyed by the damning evidence and the media attention, had become a federal case. His important connections had evaporated overnight, his calls unreturned. The man who once felt untouchable, who judged others on their profile, now couldn't get an interview for a basic assistant manager position at a suburban chain restaurant. His name had become synonymous with bigotry in the industry he once ruled. On Kibō's opening night, the restaurant was packed, a vibrant, buzzing mosaic of New York City. Andre looked around the dining room, a sea of happy faces of every color and background, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine, profound pride. It wasn't the empty, cruel pride of humiliating others that had fueled Morrison, but the deep, resonant pride of building something meaningful, something that added light to the world. Kibō was an instant, runaway success. Reservations were booked, solid for 3 months. Food critics raved not only about Marcus's exceptional, innovative cuisine but about the unusually warm, welcoming, and respectful atmosphere that Andre had painstakingly created. The employees smiled, not because a manual told them to, but because they felt valued. The customers felt welcome, not because of the price of their watch or the color of their skin, but because they were human beings. Late in the evening rush, Marcus came out of the kitchen, his chef's whites spotted with sauce, a look of tired satisfaction on his face. "Chef," he said, using the title with a respectful grin. "Table 12 wants to thank you personally. They said they've never been treated so well in a fine dining restaurant in their lives." Andre walked over to the table where an elderly black couple sat, beaming. "We just wanted to thank you, young man," the woman said, her eyes shining. "It's been so long since we felt truly welcome, truly seen. In a place like this, it was those moments that affirmed why he had fought so hard. It was never about revenge. It was about creating spaces where no one would ever have to feel the way he had felt at the Sakura Palace, small, invisible, and unworthy." A year after his firing, Andre sat in his office overlooking the main dining room of Kibō, reviewing proposals to open a second location in Brooklyn. His mother had retired. He had insisted on covering all her expenses, giving her the rest she had earned 1,000 times over. The staff at Kibō had become a family, a testament to a leadership style built on trust, not fear. The last Andre had heard of Morrison was a rumor that he was working as an assistant manager at a fast food franchise in New Jersey. It was a strange, pathetic irony. The man who so despised people he considered beneath him now depended on the generosity of an employer willing to give a disgraced bigot a second chance. Andre looked out his office window at the bustling Harlem street below. People of all colors, backgrounds, and walks of life passed by, many stopping to read Kibō's menu, their faces filled with curiosity and interest. This was the community Morrison had tried so desperately to exclude. And now, they were the foundation of Andre's triumphant success. He finally understood. The best revenge wasn't destroying the man who tried to break him. It was building something so beautiful, so successful, so hopeful, that it made everything Morrison stood for completely and utterly irrelevant. While Morrison languished in a prison of his own bitterness and irrelevance, Andre was growing an empire by creating opportunities, fostering dignity, and changing lives. Morrison had tried to diminish him because of the color of his skin, but, in the end, he had only revealed his own profound insignificance. True victory, Andre now knew, wasn't about bringing down those who wronged you. It was about building a life and a legacy so magnificent that they could never have imagined it, even in their wildest dreams.